The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Some Pharisees approached Jesus and asked, "Is it against the law for a man to divorce his wife?" They were testing him. He answered them, "What did Moses command you?" "Moses allowed us," they said, "to draw up a writ of dismissal and so to divorce." Then Jesus said to them, "It was because you were so unteachable that he wrote this commandment for you. But from the beginning, God made them male and female. This is why a man must leave father and mother, and the two become one body. They are no longer two, therefore, but one body. So then, what God has united, man must not divide." Back in the house, the disciples questioned him again about this, and he said to them, "The man who divorces his wife and marries another is guilty of adultery against her. If a woman divorces her husband and marries another, she is guilty of adultery too." People were bringing little children to him for him to touch them. The disciples turned them away, but when Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said to them, "Let the little children come to me. Do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs. I tell you solemnly, anyone who does not welcome the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." Then he put his arms round them, laid his hands on them, and gave them his blessing. The Gospel of the Lord. Did you notice in the question that the Pharisees put to Jesus, St. Mark says they were testing him. We find that quite often in the Gospel when the Pharisees or other people ask Jesus a question to test him, to try and trip him up. Might think perhaps of the tax to Caesar. They were trying to trip Jesus up in saying whether he should pay taxes or not. And of course his answer was, "Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God." We've got a few other examples in the New Testament of the questions that Jesus' enemies were asking him to try and trip him up. But this question here is slightly different. Perhaps they really were finding it very difficult, the idea that there was no such thing in God's law as divorce. The disciples themselves found that very hard to take too, because Moses, as Jesus admitted, had allowed the people to divorce. He said it was because they were so unteachable, they couldn't learn. Nevertheless, Jesus was very clear. Marriage is for keeps. And in fact, Jesus raised marriage from being a covenant, an institution, if you like, a human thing, to something divine, a sacrament. A sacrament is a way in which God draws us to himself, he gives us his grace, and we can grow in holiness. And that's precisely what marriage is about. It's the spouses help each other to grow in holiness. What is marriage all about then? God has given us this wonderful sacrament in which he asks husband and wife, man and woman, to give themselves unconditionally to each other. It's a relationship based on love, Of course, there's the romantic love, which is a very significant part of marriage. It's part of the thing that holds them together. It's not just something that unites, bonding you, but also something that is open to new life, and something that's good in itself and has its own psychological value, helping you to grow together. So there's that side of marriage, but it's also a marriage that accepts the other for their good. It's for the good of each other that people marry, and hopefully helping each other on their way to heaven, not just through the ups and the downs of this life, but together we set our target as heaven, really mirroring God's love for the church in this wonderful sacrament. In our days, we're finding this sacrament of marriage very much challenged by our society, and especially by the government, who wants to have marriage for homosexuals. It's very important we get clear in our mind that it doesn't matter what you say, using the word marriage, marriage means one thing. It is the union between husband and wife, a man and a woman, in lifelong fidelity for the good of each other. So if we erode one part of it, we're eroding what the true sense of marriage is. So if we take away the romance, if we take away the idea that it's permanent, and also if we take away the idea that it's between man and woman and not the same sexes, then we're eroding marriage itself. It's very important that we defend Christian marriage, the true sense of marriage in our society. We might think, well, it doesn't matter what other people do, we're just getting on with our own thing. No, marriage is the foundation of our society. It's that basic communion of persons. And it's not just something private that doesn't affect the rest of the world. It does affect the rest of the world, because each one of us living out a marriage, a faithful marriage, is an example to the world of what genuine Christian love is about. Of course, the issue of homosexuality in marriage needs to be addressed. We do need to have pastoral care for those who have a homosexual orientation, whether they're men or women. There are some people who, it seems, would have that, naturally seem to be like that. That's there, and they're not just going against God or whatever. And we need to love them and to care for them, yes, but we must never say homosexual union is right. It isn't. It's against God's law. Jesus finishes by talking about let little children come to me. And so that makes us obviously logically think of the end of marriage, that if it's God's will, then children should come from that union, and that children then should be brought up in that faith. That's the domestic church, if you like, the family life. And it's there that you teach your children to love God and our neighbour. It's there that they're taught up ordinary human values that are perfected by our Christian faith. So we ask God today to help us to have a great understanding, a profound understanding of the effect of marriage on our society, and that we might have the courage to stand up for Christian marriage.